Warning. The following may contain concepts, ideas, and or reflections unique in nature and not yet approved by government and or corporate entities. This content is for entertainment purposes only and is not intended to stimulate further reflection or to perpetuate additional discourse beyond the scope already outlined by institutional curriculum. To discuss the present and ultimately the future of copyright law, let us take a look into the past. At around 1480, there were already 110 different printing presses in action in Europe, and printed literature continued to explode from here. I think that it is safe to say that this was the wild era for copyright infringement. An author would print a book from a publisher, and if there was even a hint of value there, the market would become quickly flooded with pirated prints. It wouldn't be until 1710 that the copyright law would be amended to more closely resemble our current laws. This was called the Statute of Anne, but it was not without its detractors. On the pro side, this would grant more rights to the author of an original piece of work, allowing the originator of an idea to be the major recipient of the profits from book sales, along with his chosen publisher, of course. Fair enough. On the con side, this law would cause there to be a monopoly of intellectual property, which they proposed would cause an intellectual stagnation of the general population, by creating a pecuniary barrier to access the ideas of brilliant minds. Also a fair argument. Now, while in theory both the pro and con camps have valid points, it seems to be more of a competition between two opposing printing presses fighting for profitability, one representing the author's publisher, and the other representing the unlicensed printer's interest. As such, at this moment in history, I believe that I will side with the author and his chosen publisher. I mean, he put the effort into his creation, and without him there would be really nothing to fight over. And something rings disingenuous in the words of the pirate publisher's claims of simply trying to enlighten the general population. However, it's important to note that this law of copyright only protected the author and his publisher for 14 years. With an option for a one-time renewal for an additional 14 years. On Wikipedia it states about the Statute of Anne. It also marked the first time that copyright had been vested primarily in the author, rather than the publisher, and also the first time that the injurious treatment of authors by publishers was recognized. Regardless of what author signed away, the second 14-year term of copyright would automatically return to them. Well, this only engenders me further to the Statute of Anne, since it seems to be fair and equitable to all of the appropriate parties. To be even-handed to those opposing the Statute of Anne, one of the most popular books to be printed on the printing press was the Bible. And before this invention, the Roman Catholic Church had a near total monopoly on the text. With monks and priests having exclusive access to the Latin manuscripts, it made it very difficult for the non-Latin speaking population to effectively question the Catholic hierarchy at that time. And although there were some ripples in the papal supremacy, it was not really until Martin Luther used the printing press to produce the Bible in the German language that Protestant Reformation really took off. It is clear that the printing press was a pivotal tool in democratizing knowledge, and dramatically increased the scope of a meaningful thought exchange for society as a whole. Still, I cannot say for certain whether the unlicensed printers were more interested in cultural enrichment or simply trying to turn a profit without giving the author a fair percentage. Still, regardless of intention, it would be indecorous to deny that the pirate printers, whether by accident or not, did contribute to the accessibility of ideas. The real question is whether the 1710 law drastically reduced the availability of publications to the average person. If it did not appear to be as cataclysmic as the law's disparagers had inferred in their arguments. In short, I'm still a fan of the Statute of Anne. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end, and our modern meddlers implemented the Copyright Act of 1976. Up to this point, the duration for the copyright terms have been gradually bumped up, from a maximum of 28 years to 42 years in 1831, to 56 years in 1909, to 75 years in 1976, to the lifespan of the author plus 70 years, or 95 years for a corporately owned copyright. As the length of time extends on the copyright terms, I begin to see the validity in the arguments of the detractors against the Statute of Anne. However, if the profits for a particular creation were solely gobbled up by the author for his or her lifespan, then fair enough. But we all know that there is, and has always been, that damnable profiteer lurking in the shadows, licking his greedy, oily lips, waiting for his opportunity to suck up all of the proceeds from any situation. It seems that this 1976 Act was the biggest metamorphosis in copyright law since the Statute of Anne. But as Wikipedia states, this law was almost exclusively discussed in publishers' and librarians' journals, with little discussion in the mainstream press. A good rule of thumb is that when a new law is passed discreetly, it is almost always done with malevolent intent. Wiki also states, at the time the law was considered to be a fair compromise between publishers' and authors' rights. But who thought this? And that almost infers that prior to this law in 1976, the poor publishers were being manhandled by the sadistic authors. Where is the example of this? Was there ever a time when a publisher would distribute an author's work for free, and the corporation was powerless to do anything until the Act finally found a fair compromise between the two parties? The biggest change in the 1976 Act was the right to transfer copyright ownership. This was huge because it converted the copyright into a commodity that could be bought or sold. Before, a publisher could still screw an author over by having them agree to a publishing and/or distribution fee that was so high that the author would realize very little in the way of profits from their own brainchild. However, before this law, the author would always be connected to his works, so regardless of what contracts were signed, the publisher couldn't do whatever they pleased with the intellectual property. However, with an ability to purchase the copyrights, the publisher could become tantamount to the author of the work, and the actual author would become completely divorced from his creation. Now all of those term extensions for the copyright duration are beginning to make sense. With insanely long terms on the copyright, and an ability to sell your copyright permanently, the question is, who the hell are these laws meant to protect? Remember that way back in 1710, there were people criticizing the copyright term being a maximum of 28 years for the actual author, non-transferable. And now a corporate entity may own the copyright of someone else's work for up to 95 years? This is pure insanity. The Copyright Act of 1976 truly made a private monopoly of all thought possible. Before, to own a copyright, you had to make something new, but now you could simply just buy it. The original copyright law of 1710 was enacted to protect the authors, which I believe it did reasonably well. And the rationale was that by protecting their ideas and creations from exploitation, it would encourage more new thoughts and books to be created. A wider variety of ideas could not help but be a good thing for society. And by protecting the author's abilities to profit from their own creations, it could not help but foster fresh authorship. However, on the other side of the coin, by limiting the copyright ownership to a maximum term of 28 years, it would ensure that there would not be a monopoly on ideas, so that once the term expired, the cost of the literature would fall and it would become more accessible to a larger part of the population. Keep in mind that public libraries only became popular after the 1850s, so if you wanted to read, you had to purchase the book from someone. And the unlicensed printing presses charged only a fraction of the official publisher's price. In my mind, the 1710 Act was the fairest compromise to all of the parties concerned, and I would like to see a return to it. But what is the reasoning behind these new copyright laws? The copyright will now last for an author's full lifetime. Okay, but that's as far as one can take it, right? Oh no. Because now the copyright is extended another 70 years after the author's death. Even if we propose that this is going directly to the author's offspring, so what? We don't imprison the children of a violent criminal, because the deeds of the father are not the deeds of the son. So why would we grant copyrights to anyone beyond death? And now the corporations have 95 years of copyright for corporate authorship, including works done anonymously. Clearly, none of the logical arguments from 1710 have carried over to the modern era. The benefits from this current legislation is that it encourages corporate monopolies owning intellectual property, and as a consequence, a creative vacuum is formed. I can see why they didn't have many mainstream articles running on the 1976 Act. It would be a hard sell. Hey everybody, here's why the corporation should have exclusive rights to own every piece of content on the planet. The author will get screwed. The consumer will get screwed. Innovation will die. General intellect will fade away. Creativity will be controlled. But this man in a suit just handed me a suitcase full of cash. So I'm going to say that the Copyright Act of 1976 is a fair compromise between authors and the publishers. But the copyright rules are not always followed. Not by the individual, because they will be litigated to an inch of their life for one infraction. No, rather, it is the large corporations who often don't play by the rules. For example, DMGT is a UK conglomerate which owns some of these newspapers. And News Corp is an American conglomerate which owns some of these papers and publishers. And this company was founded and chaired by Rupert Murdoch, the same Rupert Murdoch who owns the Fox Corporation, and who sold Disney 20th Century Fox in 2019. So how does this all tie together? Well, DMGT and Rupert Murdoch's News Corp represent two of the total 26 shareholders of a private corporation called PA Media. And this company owns the subsidiary Alamy. And what the hell is Alamy? Alamy is mainly a stock image provider. If you need photos, they're your go-to. I've run into this company a lot when I'm Googling for a little bit of visual aid for one of my videos. However, if we quickly scan their service, let's say for a picture of the Mona Lisa, I get this page. And here they will sell me the rights to use this photo. $20 Canadian for non-commercial use, and $50 to use this image on my website. Hold on. I don't think that the Mona Lisa was painted that recently. So even with a 95-year copyright law, how the hell do they hold on to this copyright? Well, as it turns out, they collected most of these images from news archives, museums, national collections, and the public domain content copied from Wikimedia Commons. The audacity of these sons of bitches is mind-blowing, and if you're not pissed off yet, listen to this. A Carol H. Highsmith sued Alamy for selling photos that she had donated to the Library of Congress. However, the judge, in his or her infinite wisdom, threw the case out because Highsmith had, in effect, signed away her copyrights by putting her photos into the public domain. Okay, so she did put them into the public domain, and now her photos are being sold from Alamy's website. What right does Alamy have to license public photos? What they are doing is illegal, even if the courts say otherwise. They brag about having 315 million photos on their websites to license out. Good, suck it all up, all of human history. It's obviously your birthright, you elitist pricks. Let me remind you that Rupert Murdoch is a major stakeholder in this company. The same man who would closely guard those exclusive broadcasting rights for Fox Sports. The same man who used to own 20th Century Fox, and if there was even a whiff of someone getting a glimpse of one of his 60-year-old movies without paying the full maximum price, he'd be driven into a litigation frenzy. And this same man has the balls to raid the public content of museums and libraries and declare instantaneous ownership over it. On second thought, it does make a lot of sense. This human leech has never created a damn thing in his entire life, but has simply become used to owning other people's ideas, thoughts, and contents as though it was his God-given right. The public domain is there for the cultural enrichment of our society as a whole, not for the monetary enrichment of a handful of billionaires. But I suppose with all of the corporate welfare that has been handed out over the years, these human slugs now feel entitled to all things public. I suppose the next step is for Rupert Murdoch to install turnstiles at every public library in the nation, so that we may all pay him an entrance fee to access these publicly funded buildings. The deliberate inaction of our governing bodies to this bold-faced theft gives strong evidence that we are indeed living in a kleptocracy. Personally, I find the topic of today's video to be maddening, especially when compared to the original copyright law of 1710, which was well reasoned, as were the points presented from both sides. At the beginning, I thought I agreed with the proponents for the new law, but maybe the detractors were right when they said that exclusive copyrights could monopolize ideas and make literature more difficult to obtain for the average person. And eventually, a monopoly of original works could lead to the intellectual and creative stagnation of society as a whole. Yep, that checks out. In the mainstream, there are no new books that I wish to read, there are no new movies that I wish to see, and there are no new songs that I wish to listen to. All the inspiration is dead, and all of the voices are generic. The only good things made today are found off of the beaten trail, and the copyright laws have done nothing to help those true authors along their way. Although I think it is an exercise in futility to try to change the copyright laws, as they are globally harmonized through the Berne Convention, with 181 different countries signed on. If even belligerent countries with a nuclear warhead arsenal are routinely laughed out of international courts, then I'm sure that our plaintive cries of protest will fall on deaf ears. The only thing we are left with is to refuse to willingly hand over any of our hard-earned money to these thieves. I refuse to pay a bandit for his contraband that he stole, no matter how tempting. I don't believe that there is anything that we have guaranteed access to in the future, which is why owning a physical copy of something is becoming more and more important. It was difficult for me to precisely identify why this video's subject matter bothered me so much. And it's not the controlling of the present that vexes me. I've seen their movies, books, TV shows, and music that they are producing today, and they can keep it. However, the billionaires seem intent on owning and controlling the past, a past that they have no right to. What concerns me is that the copyright control goes beyond a simple lust for profit. As the name implies, the copyright is a right to copy, perform, and distribute, but it also gives the right not to copy. In other words, a copyright holder may scrub something from the history books, and if everything is digital, then this is so much easier to do. At this point, I believe that it would be better to have no copyright laws and allow for a free flow of ideas and art. Unless you believe yourself to be a deity amongst mere mortals, it makes more sense to freely give up your intellectual property in exchange for the unlimited access to all of the intellectual property in the world, both the past and the present. That's a reasonable price to pay, isn't it? Better than paying through the nose for every single note, word, image, or thought that has ever existed, if the global elite have their way.